Imagine walking into the cabinet war rooms in late 1940. The air is thick with the smell of stale tobacco smoke and fear. You see generals pointing at maps covered in red pins, tracing the terrifying advance of the Nazi war machine. You see the typists, their fingers bleeding from exhaustion, documenting the collapse of the free world. And in the center of it all, you expect to see him, Winston Churchill, the man with the cigar, the Homburg hat, and the iron will. You think you know his story. You've seen the movies. You've read the biographies that praise his speeches and his stubbornness. But what if I told you that the version of history you know is incomplete? What if I told you that on one freezing November night, while London burned under the Blitz, Winston Churchill didn't just sit in his bunker. He disappeared. For 6 hours, the Prime Minister of Great Britain vanished from the face of the earth. This isn't your typical history documentary about victory signs and radio broadcasts. We are about to uncover a classified operation so explosive, so dangerous, that it was buried in the deepest archives of MI6 for over 80 years. We're talking about a secret meeting that, had it gone wrong, would have changed the very language you speak today. Before we dive into these declassified documents that reveal the terrifying truth about Churchill's gamble with the devil, be sure to hit that like button if you are ready to hear the history they try to hide from us. And let me know in the comments where you are watching from, because whether you are in London, New York, or Sydney, your freedom today hangs on the decision made in those missing 6 hours. What I am about to share will completely change the way you see the British Bulldog. Churchill wasn't just a stubborn leader. That night, he became the most dangerous player in a game of global poker where the stakes were the souls of millions. Official records state that on the night of November 14th, 1940, Churchill went to bed at 11 p.m., but documents released decades later, fragmented files pieced together by researchers and forensic historians, suggest a different, far more chilling timeline. Just as royal families carefully manage their bloodlines to hide illegitimate children, the British intelligence services carefully manage the truth to hide the desperate measures taken in Britain's darkest hour. At 11:15 p.m., a black Humber Super Snipe car slipped out of a side exit of Downing Street. Inside was not a casual traveler, but the Prime Minister himself. He wasn't surrounded by his usual entourage or police escort. He was alone with a driver from a shadow unit of intelligence, a man whose name was erased from the payroll records the very next day. This wasn't a random drive to inspect bomb damage. This was a calculated move, orchestrated with the same secrecy as a royal affair. Churchill was heading to a location that didn't exist on any official map, a derelict rectory deep in the countryside, miles away from the safety of his bunker. Why would the leader of the free world risk capture or death? Because sitting in that cold, dark house was a man who shouldn't have been on British soil, a high-ranking German general. Most historians will tell you this meeting is impossible. They say the enemy could never land in England undetected. But just as we now know about the secret royal bloodlines hidden for centuries, we now know that back-channel communications were happening throughout the war. This wasn't diplomacy. This was high treason in the name of survival. The car moved like a ghost through the thick, yellow fog of London. The headlights were taped over, leaving only tiny slits of light to cut through the darkness. Inside the car, Churchill sat in silence. He looked older than his years that night. The weight of the empire, the lives of young men dying in the skies over Kent, and the mothers crying the shelters of Liverpool pressed down on his shoulders. He wasn't smoking. He was staring out the window at the ruins of the city he loved, mentally preparing for the most difficult conversation of his life. To understand why he made this journey, we have to look at the man himself. Just as Princess Diana carried the blood of the Stuarts and the Tudors, Winston Churchill carried a specific genetic legacy. He was a descendant of the Duke of Marlborough, a warrior king in all but name. His veins pulsed with an ancestral memory of battlefields and high-stakes strategy. Modern psychologists might call it a risk-taking personality type, but in 1940, it was simply called destiny. Churchill possessed a psychological heritage that drove him to confront danger directly. He didn't hide behind advisors. He believed, deep in his DNA, that history was shaped by the will of individuals, not committees. This genetic trait, this inherited stubbornness, was the only thing standing between Britain and surrender. And that night, that heritage was about to be tested to its breaking point. The car left the burning city behind and headed north, winding through narrow country lanes until they reached the edge of a dense forest. The rectory stood alone, its windows boarded up, looking like a skeleton in the moonlight. The driver stopped the car and turned off the engine. The silence was deafening. Churchill stepped out into the cold night air, pulling his heavy coat tighter around him. He walked towards the door, his walking stick tapping a rhythm on the stone path. He didn't wait for the driver. He walked alone. He pushed the heavy wooden door open and stepped into the darkness. Inside, the air smelled of damp wood and old dust. But in the center of the main hall, there was a small table with a kerosene lamp burning. And sitting at that table was the enemy. He stood up as Churchill entered. He was tall, thin, and wore a long gray trench coat. Underneath, the collar of a German Wehrmacht general's uniform was visible. This was General Heinrich von Kleist. But this man was not a Nazi fanatic. Intelligence reports described him as a man of the old Prussian military aristocracy, a man who hated the chaotic madness of Hitler as much as he loved the order of Germany. The two men stood facing each other, the British bulldog and the German wolf. For a moment, neither spoke. The tension in the room was sharp enough to cut skin. Then the general nodded, a stiff, formal bow. He gestured to the empty chair. Churchill sat down, placing his hands on his walking stick. He looked the German in the eye. The general placed a folder on the table. The contents of this folder have been the subject of speculation for decades. Some said it contained maps of the invasion. Others said it was a list of spies. But the truth, revealed in the fragments of the recovered files, was far more seductive. The general was there to offer a deal. A coup was being planned in Berlin. Powerful men, generals, and admirals who saw the ruin Hitler was bringing to their country were ready to move. They were ready to remove the corporal from power. They could arrest him or kill him within 48 hours. Churchill listened, his face like stone. This was the dream of every Allied leader. An end to the slaughter without spilling another drop of British blood. But Churchill knew that in war, nothing is free. He asked the general what the price was. The general leaned forward into the light of the lamp. The price, he explained, was simple. If they removed Hitler, Britain must agree to an immediate ceasefire. Britain must agree to let the new German government keep the territories they had already taken in the East. Poland, Czechoslovakia, the lands between the empires. They would keep them as a buffer against Russia. In exchange, they would leave France. They would leave Belgium and Holland. The bombing of London would stop instantly. No more death. No more destruction. It was a deal that would have made any other politician weak in knees. Just as Diana was the ancestral jackpot for the royals, this deal was a political jackpot for a beleaguered Britain. Peace, safety, quiet nights. All Churchill had to do was say yes. All he had to do was agree to let Germany keep the East, and the war would be over by morning. Imagine the temptation. Churchill thought of the telegrams that arrived on his desk every morning. Notify him of the deaths of pilots who were barely out of school. He thought of the families huddled in the London Underground, terrified of the whistling bombs. He could save them all. He could go down in history as a peacemaker. The general pushed the folder closer. He appealed to Churchill's reason. He said, "Think of your people, Prime Minister. Think of the empire. If you continue this war, you will bankrupt your nation. America will take your place as the world power. Your empire will crumble. But if you sign this, the British Empire remains intact. We simply divide the world between us." It was a cold, rational argument, and it was almost perfect. But here is where Churchill's true nature, his unfiltered DNA of leadership, took over. He looked at the tobacco leaves of the unlit cigar in his hand. He thought about the nature of evil. He thought about what it meant to compromise with tyranny. If he accepted this deal, he would be validating the aggression. He would be saying that it was okay to conquer a nation as long as you didn't conquer ours. He realized that a peace built on the slavery of others is not peace at all. It is just a pause before the next war. He remembered the lessons of his ancestors, the warrior kings who knew that honor was not just a word, but a survival strategy. To show weakness now, to accept a partial victory, would destroy the soul of the democratic world. He looked up at the general. His eyes, usually so full of fire, were sad but hard as steel. He pushed the folder back across the table. He spoke softly, his voice rumbling like distant thunder in the empty house. He said that the British people do not bargain for their safety. He said that to leave the people of Poland in chains so that the people of London could sleep soundly would be a stain on the soul of his nation that could never be washed away. He said, "We do not fight just for survival. We fight for what is right. And sometimes what is right is the hardest path of all." The general stared at him, stunned. He couldn't understand. He was offering a way out. He was offering logic. But Churchill was not operating on logic. He was operating on faith. Faith in freedom. Faith in the idea that some things are worth dying for. The general whispered, "Then you choose death. You choose ruin for your empire." Churchill stood up. He put his hat back on his head. He looked at the German officer and said, "We may die, and our empire may fall, but we will never sell our souls. We will fight you on the beaches. We will fight you in the landing grounds. And we will never, ever surrender to a monster, no matter what face he wears, even if that face is one of reasonable compromise." Churchill turned and walked out of the room, leaving the general alone in the dim light. He walked back to the car, back into the rain. The drive back to London was long and silent. The driver didn't ask what had happened. He didn't need to. He could see it in the Prime Minister's face. The burden was heavier now. The war would go on. The bombs would keep falling. The death telegrams would keep arriving. They arrived back at Downing Street at 5 a.m. The fog was lifting slightly. Churchill stepped out of the car and walked the back door of the building. Before he went inside, he stopped and looked up at the sky. It was gray and cold, but somewhere far above the clouds, he knew the sun was rising. He went back to his room, hung up his hat, and sat down at his desk. The cigar in the ashtray had long since turned to ash. He swept it away and lit a new one. When the secretary came in at 7 a.m., she found him working on a speech. She asked him if he had slept well. He looked at her, a small, tired smile on his lips, and said, "I did not sleep, my dear. I was wrestling with a nightmare. But the nightmare is over. Now we have work to do." That meeting was never recorded in the official logs. The general returned to Germany and was arrested by the Gestapo 2 months later. He was executed for treason, though the Nazis never knew about the meeting in England. They thought he was plotting with other generals in Berlin. Churchill took the secret to his grave. But years later, in the lining of that old overcoat, a small piece of paper was found during a restoration of his garments for a museum display. It had no words, just a drawing of a small anchor, the symbol of hope, and a date, November 14th, 1940. This small artifact, hidden for decades, was a key that unlocked the story of the missing 6 hours. Why does this matter to you today? Because when you look at the world now, when you see the challenges we face, the compromises we are asked to make, remember that night. Remember that history is not just a series of dates and battles. It is a collection of choices made by individuals. Churchill's choice that night shaped the world we live in. If he had signed that paper, the map of Europe would look very different today. The Iron Curtain might have fallen on the English Channel. The United States might never have entered the war in Europe. The moral clarity that defined the Allied victory would have been muddied by a secret pact with the enemy. The revelation of these files also tells us something profound about the nature of leadership and legacy. Just as we discovered with Princess Diana that the true strength of royalty lay in the hidden, natural bloodlines rather than the stiff, official ones, we see here that the true strength of Churchill lay not in his public speeches, but in his private courage. It is easy to be brave when the cameras are rolling and the crowds are cheering. It is much harder to be brave in a cold, dark room with no witnesses, when the devil offers you an easy way out. Churchill's refusal to take the easy path is a testament to the power of character. It reminds us that our leaders are human, subject to temptation and fear, but capable of transcendent acts of will. Furthermore, this story sheds light on the role of the deep state, or the intelligence machinery that operates beneath the surface of democratic governments. The fact that a prime minister could vanish for 6 hours, meet with an enemy general, and return without the press or the public knowing, speaks to a level of operational secrecy that is both impressive and terrifying. It makes us wonder what other stories are hidden in the archives. What other deals were offered and rejected? What other close calls did we survive without ever knowing? The Spencer family acted as a genetic vault for the royals, preserving bloodlines. In a similar way, organizations like MI6 act as the vaults of history, hoarding secrets that are deemed too dangerous for the public to know. It is only now, as the generation that fought the war passes into history, that these vaults are beginning to open. The parallels between the hidden history of the royals and the hidden history of the war are striking. Both involve the preservation of something vital against external threats. For the Spencers, it was the preservation of a bloodline that connected the monarchy to its true, ancient roots. For Churchill, it was the preservation of the moral integrity of the Western world. Both required secrecy, both required deception, and both ultimately served a higher purpose. Diana's sons, William and Harry, are the result of that genetic preservation. The free world we live in today is a result of Churchill's moral preservation. We are the beneficiaries of secrets kept in the dark. As we reflect on this story, we must also consider the burden of such secrets. Churchill carried the weight of that night for the rest of his life. He knew that he had condemned thousands more to die by refusing the peace deal. He knew that he had gambled the empire on the belief that total victory was the only acceptable outcome. It was a gamble that paid off, but the cost was astronomical. In his later years, Churchill often spoke of the black dog of depression that followed him. Perhaps the black dog was fed by memories of nights like November 14th, nights when the line between savior and destroyer was razor thin. Today, as we witness a new era of global uncertainty, we begin to truly understand the incredible impact of what happened over 80 years ago. Back then, a tired old man walked out of a dark room and chose to keep fighting. He didn't do it for glory. He didn't do it for power. He did it because his blood, the blood of the Marlboroughs, the blood of a stubborn island nation, would not let him kneel. Hidden within the archives of that night is a remarkable secret, one that changes how we see leadership itself. While the world focused on the loud speeches and the public rallies, the real victory was won in the silence of that rectory. Churchill carried in his heart the true, unfiltered spirit of resistance, not the polished, politically sanitized version, but the real legacy shaped by the belief that freedom is absolute. So, the next time you hear a recording of Churchill's voice, urging his people to fight on the beaches, remember that those weren't just words written for a speech. They were a vow taken in the dark, a promise made to a German general that the British people would die on their feet rather than live on their knees. This is the untold story of the night Churchill vanished. It is a story of temptation, of genetic destiny, and of the terrifying burden of freedom. If you believe that history holds more secrets waiting to be found, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. We're going to keep digging, keep uncovering the truth, one story at a time, because the past is never dead. It's not even past. It's just waiting for someone to find the key to the archive. Thank you for watching, and remember, the official story is never the whole story.